What is your creative process in developing new content, Karam?
I enjoy improving myself and establishing new objectives. Drawing is fun, but I prefer drawing with a goal in mind. I enjoy generative art and I want to innovate and improve before releasing anything new.
Interesting. Um, Owen, is that same sort of process for you on the AI generative art side, or is there much more coding that goes into your work of making the is it the OX bend the monsters? How do I say that properly so that I no
Oh,
longer just read
I pronounce it 0x Mons.
0x? Thank you. I'm gonna go with what the creator says. So 0x mines. Yes.
Ooh, I think it's it's definitely it was very coding oriented in the beginning. Trying to get the right flow to get the images and then pair them with the animation. I think that some of the more recent NFT projects that I've done have definitely been more uh, artistically inspired. I think one area that some of the people who collect art NFTs really like is the on-chain stuff, where you have the actual SVG or text or something being generated by your contracts data. So that way you don't have to link necessarily even to a server, IPFS or Arweave. And in those cases, you're working with a much more limited canvas because Solidity has code limits. The SVG format isn't necessarily expressive of everything you want. And I think in those cases, when I'm coding up something like that, it feels more like drawing, where I'm thinking, okay, I have these colors here. How can I arrange them? What's information I can pull from? And that's got a lot more back and forth.
Hey, that's awesome. Sorry, I'm fighting my mute button here for some reason. Do you start with the platform or blockchain? I mean, obviously we're all working with Ethereum here, but do you start with your platform where the art's going to end up in mind before you get started, or do you have a piece in mind and kind of work towards that? I guess could you kind of walk us through your creative process a little bit, and then when you're done with that, same sort of question to you, Karam.
So up until now, I've just been deploying things on Ethereum. So platform hasn't been, or base layer chain hasn't exactly been too big of a sticking point for me.
Gotcha. So you don't necessarily, it's not the blockchain that's a limitation for you. You start with your art and your vision, and you kind of take it from there.
Oh, I guess maybe that's not the right way to put it. More like I generally think in terms of Ethereum. So I think that is sort of the constraint that I work with of how much can I fit into this animation or this design.
Gotcha. So the creativity comes from potentially some of the limitations from Ethereum right now in terms of, hey, what can you insert in that to make sure it works, right? Or is
Yeah.
that just part of what you're trying to do within the environment?
Yeah, it's definitely very influenced.
Nice. Karam, do you start with the art vision and let the design creative process influence you slash the technology component, or is there another way you go about it?
Well, because I only work with Ethereum, I'm never thinking about the blockchain. Understanding the technology component is the most important part, in my opinion. Before trying to paint a masterpiece, you should get comfortable with your tools first, understand how they work and their limitations. Only then can you fully use them to their full potential. A lot of artists still think of NFTs as virtual pictures, but it's much more than that. Using smart contracts, you can create art that evolves, that you can interact on chain with. We've really never seen anything like that before.
I definitely want to ask about the tools that you each use, but Owen, I didn't know if maybe you could expand a little bit because I feel like you were getting close to talking about this as well as the interactive NFTs. I feel like that's what Karam was just getting at with with interactive. Do you have, or can you give an analogy for folks in mind so that they can kind of visualize what this is going to look like moving forward? For me, it's like essentially, let's say you are awarded an NFT and it gets close to Christmas time, and you are award, you're airdropped a Santa hat for that because in some background the time hit from what the developer wanted that to go. Is that kind of an analogy that could be used here, or do you have something cleaner that could help explain it to our audience?
Yeah. So when you talk about, I guess dynamic NFTs, so, NFTs where some amount of the data, whether that's, the name, description, or the image is changing, I think one maybe easy way to think about it is to break it into sort of active or passive changes. There's been some sort of cute stuff where your NFT is, for example, like a clock or a calendar. And every time you ask it for an image, it'll actually just grab the timestamp and show you something new. So that's something where you don't have to necessarily make a new transaction or something. It's just reading data and giving you something new every time. But there's also, on like the more interactive front, there's been some really cool stuff. Deaf Beef is this generative audiovisual artist who made this project called Glitchbox, where it's essentially like an on-chain synthesizer. You can change the parameters, then make a transaction, and then you'll end up with like a new set of sounds. So I think that might be like one way to think about it, where you might be able to twist some of these knobs or make some things happen with the transaction that you submit to the blockchain. And now that the state is updated, you get something that changes based on your choices.
That's pretty cool. But whatever you choose would potentially be a whole new item based on the knobs or buttons that you pushed and the outputs that those would create, right? So it's basically an infinitely generative thing based on the creativity of the person pushing the buttons or turning the knobs, right?
Yeah, and then you can imagine, different variations of that for the like whole interactive spectrum.
That's really cool. Real quick, Karab, can you kind of speak to the tools and walk us through a typical workflow? Like what programs do you favor? And do you have any tips or tricks that you could provide for a streamlined process for folks?
So as far as generative art, I use art blocks. For the other question, the typical workflow, I use Photoshop to draw and PyCharm to code with Python. There's no universal streamlined process, so it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve. As a pro tip, don't try to reverse engineer the generation of CryptoPunks to create a matching high definition version of them, or you're going to have a major headache trying to fix everything. Never again.
Sounds like a bit of a headache there, and I'm sure Owen can appreciate that. Owen, do you use many of the same tools, I imagine, then, and then it differs in terms of maybe you're probably using a different IDE or development environment compared to how Karab approaches this with your generative work, or is that ultimately kind of similar once you've got the coding down and you're more worried about the graphic side of it?
So for the Zero Exponents project, I did use Python because that was what enabled me to work with the machine learning models. Nowadays, I think I will maybe still use Python to prototype maybe a generative algorithm, and then I'll have to translate it to Solidity for the actual contracts. But I have found myself working a lot with just like raw SVG. So I'm writing tags and then rendering them. So I have like a simple SVG IDE that does this essentially.
What upcoming project ideas, yours or somebody else, excite you most for the potentials of this technology? And Karam, I'll let you go ahead and start with this one.
I would like to explore art that can evolve, but I would need to learn more about Solidity. Foobar handles the Solidity part. I don't do anything on the chain personally.
Owen, same to you. Is there any upcoming project or idea that you're just absolutely stoked for, be it yours or somebody else's in the space?
Yes, so I am really excited for Pillhead, and I'll drop the link below. They're working on, it's so difficult to describe this. They're working on like a combination between, like on-chain role-playing things where you'll have an avatar that will keep track of stats. You've got this like dynamism and interactivity going on, but they have this incredible team of like artists who both do the visuals, sounds, etc., that are essentially creating this like alternate universe where they're taking in large projects from the Ethereum blockchain and then reinventing them under their like mythos or mythology. So I think, under the story, like Vitalik is some sort of snake god, which is funny because he helped with the programming language Viper. They've got, like these guild lords, and one of them is like Stani from Ave, and they've got an incredible team that's like unifying all this, and it's weird, crazy sci-fi x fantasy universe. And then they're pairing this all with what I think will be a really cool, like extensible, like on-chain role-playing system.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It's really being brought to life by everybody that's just working together on it. That's really, really neat.
Yeah.
Do you have any visions that are currently limited by the available technology, or what technology or advances would be required, to bring anything to fruition that might be limited at this point for you?
I think that as always, having more storage is always great. You can work with larger file sizes, larger images. I think the thing that I want, and what probably everyone wants the most, is being able to program in a similar environment to what we have today with lower fees. So bringing it back again, we like the roll-ups. We want the roll-ups as soon as we can get them.
Karam, do you have any visions that are currently limited by available technology? And what sort of technology and advances would be required to bring those to fruition?
I don't know enough about the current technology to know what it's not capable of doing. Possibilities really seem endless. We could talk about five senses. Currently, we only use sight and hearing to enjoy virtual art. What about touch, smell, and taste? Could technology come to a point where we get these pieces of information sent directly to our brain, totally indistinguishable from real life? For now, I still need to get outside to enjoy a cool breeze.
Yeah, right. The whole Ready Player One concept. I certainly think that all of our all our senses are going to be bombarded by the time developers are done coming at us with this stuff. It's certainly exciting to watch being played out here. In your opinion, Karam, what are some of the biggest obstacles, challenges, or benefits to blockchain technology being applied to, say, financial sector operations at this time?
Well, it's a little bit cruel to newbies. If you send money to the wrong address, it's probably gone forever. You can't charge back or call your bank.
Yeah, that's kind of rough, right, Owen? Like you've kind of got a high learning curve there if you send something where it shouldn't go. Do you have any opinions on what some of the biggest obstacles and challenges are going to be moving forward onboarding folks?
I think that's definitely an important one. Just the irreversibility of things, and the lack of good ways to attest to personhood can make it very difficult to understand if someone is acting maliciously or not. And I think we're already running up to that in some of the recent stuff with OpenSea, like on their front end, like freezing people's assets because they claimed that they were hacked or didn't intend to sell. I think that it probably goes, if we want to onboard more people, we'll need more safety nets. So I think in the two areas of having maybe better insurance, and then if you want good insurance, I think there, while some people might be ideologically opposed, maybe more ways to verify things like personhood for the blockchain, or on some secondary layer. I can imagine, for example, in the near future, a lot of people might be using like some sort of insured network, similar to how you can charge back on credit cards, and there's some way that a business is making money by taking X% of transfers, which can fund potential issues that people have. So I guess I still want Ethereum to be credible, simple base layer, but we might see things built on top that can better facilitate business or consumer functions with more safety rails.
That's fascinating. Could you see something kind of put in place then to kind of act as, like you were just talking about, some sort of fee structure put in place to account for chargebacks within a network that people would just agree to, and then there you have a chargeback mechanism moving forward? Like if you can get enough people on board, it can be designed at this point? to kind of work around these, or are we so far along that the technologies that we've kind of got to get consumers used to a new mindset?
So I personally wouldn't want to see, Ethereum itself adopt this. I think, there are a whole bunch of thorny issues of like, who gets the chargeback, what the fee should be set to. I do imagine that, there could be something like, Visa's, I think, building its own like network sort of on top of Ethereum. I imagine that, for more opinionated use cases, people might be able to opt into that, where the idea is like, okay, you're going onto this network, maybe there was some KYC involved, right? Like Ethereum is still involved as maybe the portal, but once you're there, you are agreeing to a different set of rules.
Gotcha. And at that point, you're within their environment and their walled garden, if you will, and subject to their user experience. As an artist, are VR and AR going to be combined within the NFT space? And if so, how do you prepare for that creatively?
Ooh, so from the art angle, and I guess from the tech angle, this isn't something I've explored a lot. I do think that one thing that is interesting to point out is that this seems to be what like Facebook is really gunning for, with their name change. And I think they really seem to be wanting to push this narrative of like, oh, Web3 is really intertwined with AR and VR. But I don't necessarily, like, that doesn't seem like maybe the most natural categorization to me. I do think for people who like might want to, go with the decentralization ethos, it might be important to try and like sort of meet Facebook on that front and provide good like decentralization tech, whether that's being able to let people view their assets in AR or something like that. But it's not something that I have a lot of expertise in right now.
Gotcha. I appreciate that answer. Karam, same question to you as an artist. Are VR, AR going to be combined within the NFT space? And if so, how are you preparing for that creatively?
In my opinion, we're still very far from good virtual reality. VR headsets make me motion sick sometimes. It's blurry, heavy, it's uncomfortable. I don't have to change my workflow though. A picture can easily be put on a wall in VR, and it's easy to import 3D models into your virtual world as well. The biggest issue is probably the technology that is still in its infancy, so it's not taken seriously.
Gotcha. And we're we're coming up to the end of our time and the end of the questions that I have here. So I'll throw this last one out to you, Karam. If only working on the art for a project, how do you properly evaluate a partner who is helping with the smart contracts? On the flip side, how do you know your art concepts are vibing with the developer requests?
You can't truly evaluate a partner for the smart contracts unless you know how to code yourself to verify his code. You just have to guess by evaluating their attitude in previous works, see if they're serious about their projects, their attitude, etc. I got lucky with Fubar. We found each other when we were doing our first NFT projects, and we both liked each other's work. There's always a lot of communication involved, like in any good professional relationship. You have to ask for feedback.
Oh, and I'd like to toss that one to you as well. If only working on the art for a project, how do you properly evaluate a partner who is helping with the smart contracts? And then on the flip side, how do you know your art concepts are, vibing with your community and then just the broader NFT community as a whole?
Yeah, so in my experience, I will do essentially both parts, generally speaking, like both the art and the contracts. There's been one time where we worked like with an artist and we commissioned them. So I guess in their perspective, they were the ones that had to trust me. And I think like what Karam points out is probably the important thing, right? Like track record. If somebody has worked with artists in the past and they've done a good job of handing over things like administrators and splitting royalties, then you probably want to work with people like that. If it's just someone that you like, I don't know, met off Fiverr or something, you probably want to be more wary. It's, I guess, unfortunate in some ways that there's not a lot of like free developer time. So I think it can be it can be difficult. Probably like track record, and then if you have developer friends, asking them like, hey, does this contract look okay? I got it from this person that I worked with.
Gotcha. Well, that was all the written questions I had. I don't know if anybody else that's participating in the call has any other follow-ups. I guess I want to thank you guys again for taking the time to participate with us, for answering our questions as thoroughly as you have, and again, just making the time to be here with us today. We really do appreciate it. I hope you see that us as GME apes, we've got a lot more in common with the NFT world, and are going to have more in common coming soon. And I hope that our communities can continue to grow together. And I hope that this was a first foray into something that'll be ongoing for us all.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me on and letting me talk a little bit about the things that I work on the daily.
I guess switching conversation more to the technology front here real quick. And I think we were kind of starting to dabble on this a little bit. ZK EVM has been referred to by others as a game changer. Can you describe what you think it will mean for the space, and how that will affect what you guys are doing at NFTX?
Yeah, so I will reiterate, my knowledge of the actual L1, L2 stuff is very limited. And I think from what I've heard is that zero knowledge proofs, like the ZK stuff, is some of the most advanced stuff in blockchains and like math and all that. But everyone basically who I consider really intelligent in the space seems to think that the ZK model is super promising, and that rollups are basically the way that we'll get the most scalability. So, I'm hopeful. I do definitely think there is good logic in scaling vertically as opposed to horizontally. And like Vitalik Buterin has posted about that a couple times, about how, even with these low transaction cost blockchains that scale horizontally more, eventually gas costs go up. So sooner or later, you just have to scale vertically.
Mm-hmm.
And, for people listening that might not understand the difference, it's kind of like if you have an island and, the island hits population saturation. And there's kind of two ways that you can scale then. I guess you could scale vertically with high rises, or you could, build another island next to it and have a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is kind of, and a lot of people argue about the definition of L2. Like some people say Polygon isn't a real L2, it's more of an L1. And I think the rollups are kind of really leaning into this vertical scaling methodology, whereas Polygon and Palm, they're a bit more like having an island next to you with a bridge, in the sense that they don't get all of their security from Ethereum itself.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's a spectrum there, and I'm definitely not the person to comment on it. I think in the end, the more experiments happening in scalability and the more options, the better it is. And there's definitely just so many teams working on this. And I definitely don't mean to sound bearish on Palm or Polygon. Like Polygon, I think, is definitely ahead of the pack right now in terms of being the scalability solution of choice. But that rollups as a technology have just been lagging a bit. And once they catch up, they may be the solution everyone's been waiting for.
Like a train leaving the station trying to catch up at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Right now. Mm-hmm. There are some people who say that Ethereum cannot remain the cheapest or fastest chain, and there are people that argue validity proofs are intense to compute, and it's not worth it for applications with little on-chain availability. Is this a legitimate concern in your mind? And if so, why? And I understand you're not necessarily on the technical side, but if you just comment more from a 10,000 foot view, I think our listeners would probably appreciate that more anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll tell a really quick story, and basically it's about rare pepes, which are these NFTs or collectibles that started coming out in 2016, and they were getting made and deployed on a Bitcoin sidechain called Counterparty,
Mm-hmm.
and Counterparty gets its security from Bitcoin. So to this day, it's still quite secure. I found out about rare pepes earlier this year, like January, February, and I started buying them up. Overpaid for some at the time, but oh well. And anyways, for months, no one really was paying attention to them. No one really cared about them. It was all about CryptoPunks and the NFTs on Ethereum. And then what happened about 3 or 4 months ago is this project called Emblem Vault. They basically built a way for people to bridge their rare Pepes over to Ethereum as like a wrapped version. And then people can buy and sell them on OpenSea, and then they can bridge them back to Bitcoin counterparty if they want, or they can just keep them on Ethereum. And what happened was that the rare Pepe trading exploded from this, because all of a sudden all these people using OpenSea were saying, hey, like I'll buy some of this stuff too. It's not too complicated. And the reason I tell that story is because I think it's really interesting how personally I'm not like very bullish, big on Bitcoin, but I don't really see it going away either. I've always liked Ethereum, but I think it's really interesting how Ethereum was basically what allowed these assets on Bitcoin to finally surge upwards. And the interesting thing is that it's the rare Pepes on Bitcoin, like they shot up in price because they were able to start getting traded on Ethereum. So yeah, the reason I tell that story is because personally, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. It could very well be the case that another chain comes along, has the perfect timing, all the right pieces, better technology, and takes off and leapfrogs Ethereum. But even if that happens, I don't see Ethereum disappearing. I think it will be kind of similar to this, rare Pepe situation where, it may actually even entrench certain assets like Ether even more as a storage of value. Like if people can start trading ETH on some other chain, on Solana or something, but if ETH is still less volatile, it has more liquidity, all this stuff, then it will likely still remain like a top asset, even if a lot of the volume isn't happening there. And this is something that, Bitcoiners learned like 4 or 5 years ago. It used to be all about like becoming a currency. And then people started saying, well, hey, maybe it's not about like the number of transactions, the number of users. Maybe it's more about like this digital gold.
The store of value narrative.
Yeah, exactly. The store of value, which can actually benefit from competitors coming up with better ways of doing cheaper trades. So yeah, I think that even if Ethereum gets leapfrogged, it's going to be like New York City or something. Yeah, sure, there's other cities out there now that are newer and more progressive and everything, but it doesn't make New York obsolete. And we've all come to think like that because of Web 2, because you end up getting these monopolies that are very strong and they basically come like an end-all winner. And in Web 3, yeah, you just don't really see that. So personally, I'm not worried at all. I just store everything on Ethereum and focus on NFTX. And, if eventually we get leapfrogged, I think I'll still end up all right.
No, I don't disagree, and I guess I want to add one point to your story, because I think that this kind of captures something that has never been able to be captured before, which is the cultural impact of what these memes and NFTs actually mean. And this bridging scenario, you had the ability of Ethereum lovers to poke Bitcoin maximalists in a way, right? to say, hey, we've got your NFTs now. Like no way before could something like that have been captured. And you have the social memeing component on top of it. It's amazing what can cause value to come, even if you have a nice bridge there. Sometimes it's going to be somebody just poking a bear, which is really going to stir everything up on top of it, right?
100%. And I think that's a really interesting parallel with GME, because it became more of a social movement than anything, right? And that's, in Web3 and with blockchains, you have all these different aspects like the technology, the economics, and the culture. These battles are fought on multiple fronts. And sometimes things work out like you said, I sold all my Bitcoin a little over a year ago and went all in on ETH. because I just saw the ecosystem growing faster. And then when I found out about rare pepes, I was like, shit, well, I need some Bitcoin to buy these things before they started getting bridged, right? So now I do have some Bitcoin, and I actually do keep my rare pepes stored on Bitcoin because it's just a bit more secure than having them wrapped on Ethereum. But yeah, who would have expected that? Like, just such a funny plot twist. And at the end of the day, everyone ends up winning.
Yeah, right. Wag me.
Yeah, exactly.
And another concern related to zero knowledge rollups is that the security scheme assumes a level of trust that is unverifiable. Further powerful computing, such as quantum computing, poses a threat of hacking. Do you have security concerns with this space, or are the smart enough people here working to solve for these problems now that this is more just mainstream media fear mongering as to what the future is going to be?
Well, yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I don't have the technical knowledge to comment on that, but I will say, like, NFTX, we're pretty innovative and not worried about security threats. I guess you could call that we lean into the risk of it all, whereas some teams are much more conservative. I think at the end of the day, there are going to be exploits and there are going to be things that go wrong, but that ultimately does move the space forward. For instance, let's say quantum computing, whatever, people start managing to wrap their heads around that and use that to do huge exploits. Well, the sooner it happens, the better, right?
I think that's a fundamental mind shift difference, though, between Web 2 and Web 3. Web 2,
exactly.
they're going to hide behind it, whereas Web 3, it's like, well, this is inevitable. Might as well get it out of the way. Or Web 3, you're going to call us a Ponzi scheme. Well, at least we're upfront about it, and the rules are such that aren't going to be manipulated to where you get a GME situation within a marketplace.
Yeah,
so I completely understand where you're coming from with that.
It's funny, yeah, because it's so different than Web 2, where people say, like, no, you shouldn't do that, bad actor. And Web 3, it's like some guy, hacks some protocol, and people are like, well, he kind of did us a service because now we know about that exploit. And yeah, that's kind of like the Wild West mentality of Web 3, because anyone can be anonymous, and you can't really police it, so you might as well just lean into it and say, like, the faster this stuff happens, the better. And I do think that also gives Ethereum a bit of an advantage, and other EVM chains, because you inevitably run into problems that you just don't realize when you're building new technology. And Ethereum has had a bit more time to kind of work out these issues, like, the big DAO hack at the time. So yeah, it's like, it's kind of inevitable, and it's fun. It's like the Wild West. Yeah.
Changes every day, right?
Yeah.
It is rumored that GameStop is going with Loopring's L2 ZK solution. Having helped launch L2 solutions for NFTX now, can you describe at a high level, the problem that you guys are looking to solve by implementing those? And then, when preparing for launch, can you describe, the last things you guys were reviewing to make sure everything was ready for prime time, for an L2 on your side?
Yeah. So yeah, just thinking here. Definitely, I should say, yeah, the ZK rollups. Yeah, I think I already mentioned this. Every team seems to think that that's a super promising solution. So I think GameStop is making a pretty wise decision there, and it's cool to see. I was speaking with some of the GameStop developers recently, and I was really happy to hear that they're thinking L2 and not some Web 2 kind of solution. So that's great. Personally, for us, it's basically impossible to get an audit these days. I think we just paid like 80 grand to book an audit, like, in 8 months. But what we have been doing, it's kind of like a gamified code review, and we used a project called Code Arena. And so then once we're ready to deploy, we kind of put all of our code, the Solidity code, live, and it's like this competition. And for a week, people can privately submit bug reports, and then the Code Arena team kind of goes through them all, and we get them, and then we give the rewards out to the people who came up with the best bugs. And that's worked pretty well for us. And we definitely got a ton of submissions. A lot of it, wasn't stuff that was actually that critical. There were a couple, good findings. And then it's kind of funny because if, let's say you're looking at this code arena and you see the code and you see a big exploit, like you could still just not say anything. And there was, like, when we first launched, there was actually a small exploit on the Punk Vault, and somebody managed to steal like 2 CryptoPunks.
Mhm.
But then they dumped them, or like 2 Punk tokens, and they dumped it really quickly. So I think they ended up getting like 30 or 40 grand or something. And it's like they could have just made more money by submitting it in the, the code arena. But I guess they took that risk and they thought, maybe they might be able to pull out like 50 punks. Fortunately, we started moving them over pretty slow just to be extra careful. So yeah, it's at the end of the day, most people say that the only way you can really be sure that something is secure, and you still can't be sure, is just by the amount of time that it's been out there and the amount of money that's been in it.
Mhm.
So, a contract that has $100 million in it for the last 2 years, well, that means that, that's $100 million of hacker incentive that has been out there for 2 years. And if no one's managed to break it by then it kind of gets this Lindy effect. I think it's the same with science, like you can't prove the theory of relativity for sure. You can only disprove it. But after decades of people being unable to disprove it, it basically becomes like accepted fact.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's kind of the same with blockchains. You can never be sure that there's not some lingering exploit still in there. But yeah, the longer it goes and with the more capital at stake, the more confident you can be that it's very unlikely.
Gotcha. I'll follow up for you on that in terms of hot goods, if you will. If somebody's wallet gets exploited, I think it's on the marketplace to communicate to somebody like you guys, who's a decentralized
Mm-hmm.
liquidity pool at the end of the day, that hey, that this NFT is should be blacklisted for whatever reason, right? Like moving forward, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be critical for these marketplaces to have some sort of agreed forum for disputes on things that may be stolen, so that unsuspecting users don't end up trafficking in stolen goods, right?
So I would actually disagree with it,
Okay.
with that take. And yeah, I think that, and it's very interesting because we're seeing OpenSea go that route, and I think they're kind of fighting an uphill battle. Uh, one of the things, at least my opinion is in Web3, it takes the onus off of the company and it puts it on the user. So, like for instance, in traditional finance, like you pay Visa a bit of money, and then the whole idea is, well, if someone steals your card and they spend 50 grand, then you don't actually have to eat that because Visa, they kind of take responsibility for the security,
Yep.
and you pay a
Interchanging
fee
their
for that.
investment, they make their money that way, and they insure
Hmm.
the rest.
And in Web3, ultimately the onus is on the user, and it gets very difficult um, for like something like Coinbase. Like you have to put in all these kind of guards, and Coinbase definitely serves a purpose, but Uniswap, for example, serves a different purpose, and it's like they have different strengths. The Coinbase strength is that it works for your average normal person who wants to use their email and to sign in and out and is okay with KYC and wants to get extra protections and extra support. And then the Uniswap benefits are that it's 100% composable. They don't have to offer any support. They don't have to, they can have a team of 10 or less and they can scale to billions of dollars in volume. And anyone can integrate them without having to get them on the phone. And, that's really the power of Web3, is that it's totally permissionless. So yeah, I think we'll see products lean to one side or the other. NFTX, we're kind of leaning more to the total decentralized side. Um, and the thing is, like, if you, let's say you call up OpenSea and you're like, hey, someone stole my NFT. It's like, how do you prove that, right?
Yeah.
And of course there are
I was in a
ways, and
boating accident, right?
yeah, you can have a KYC and you can show your driver's license, but it's a very uphill battle. So yeah, I think there's definitely room for products on both sides. And like ultimately, I hope we don't end up living in a world where, everyone can just rob each other at gunpoint and take their entire wealth. Like I do still think there's a purpose to having banks. Like I use banks to actually store my seed phrases. Because I don't want someone coming to my house with a big wrench and saying, give me your seed phrase.
Oh, because you bought a ledger and you were in the ledger attack, and now you're worried about a wrench
Yeah,
attack.
it's like, exactly. It's like the wrench attack, right? Like, so like you still want, like I still have certain accounts that are like in certain ledgers that they're just at the bank. And that way, the bank can't get robbed. And if I
Are you
die
worried
in
about
some,
them denying you access though? Because that is the one concern I've always heard
yeah,
about. Going with a
100%.
bank is being denied access at that point. So is that one of
And
those
so
things where you
there's
got to split across like 3 different banks with 3 different sets? Like it really
exactly,
is how paranoid you want to get and how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
yeah, exactly. There's so many things to consider. Like I had one bank, and recently I went in there to check my security deposit box. And they didn't even check my ID. And I was like, well, what's the point of this? And they're like, well, if you have the key, we assume that that's fine. And I'm like, well, what if someone comes to my house with a gun and asks for the key, right? So there's
Yeah.
like all these. So then you could kind of double it and have multiple banks, but then each one that you have the entire seed phrase at is actually kind of an exploit in itself if someone manages to get in there and pretend to be you. So like
Yep.
personally, what I've done is I've split my seed phrase into multiple parts, and then I put them in different banks. But yeah, I also worry that the banks might deny me access one day. So I do have some accounts that I have other tricks, which I probably shouldn't go into on a Q&A. But yeah, there's no perfect solution for this. I think the best thing for people to do is to just think through these problems themselves. Probably to use a safety deposit box at a bank, but then also to keep some money, some accounts just to yourself, just on the off chance that, the bank denies you entry. Depends on how much trust you have in the traditional finance system, I guess.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We're all individual investors. We got to all determine our amount of risk, right?
Yeah, and it's just, from our team's perspective, we're a small team, like less than 10 people right now. And so we're just trying to leverage Web3 as much as we can by, everything being permissionless, no special catering to certain users over others. It's just everyone, same rules for everybody. And we're hoping that helps us scale without having to, have a 50-person, 100-person team, kind of like how Uniswap managed to scale really well. But that's not the strategy for every team. And like, I wouldn't be surprised if GameStop ends up taking a more user-centric approach and, applying a bit more security on behalf of the user. And it really depends on who your target demographic is and, the size of the team that you have.
Makes a lot of sense that,
Cool.
especially at their scale, they're probably going to want to be able to have that white glove
Exactly.
support
Kind of like
for their
Coinbase that
user
way.
to be able to just log in and game. It's that point, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
You've been
100%.
so generous with your time here. I want to get you out with this last question here. Based on recent announcements, NFTX is embracing the graph and becoming more and more decentralized. Can you describe what this means for your marketplace and what benefits this offers over, a traditional Web 2 setup? And then, does this decentralized approach make sense for all marketplaces moving forward, or is it again something that you're gonna have to consider your own individual use cases?
Yeah, so like similar to what I was saying, I think that the composability of being like totally permissionless and decentralized, it has huge upside. And like you said, like how we're using the graph for our data now, and people can kind of access that without needing special API keys or permission. I think that the benefits of being totally decentralized show up more in the long term. Um, and in the short term, it often seems like the centralized route has bigger advantages than it really does. For example, like, you can get away, like OpenSea, you can list your item for sale without having to pay any gas because they use some like Web 2 trickery. But because of that, it's actually much more difficult to integrate with the OpenSea marketplace because again, they have this, it's half on chain and half off chain. And I think the argument could be made by like an OpenSea exec, that's good. They don't want people integrating them, they want people coming to OpenSea. But I think that really kind of misses the power of Web3. And like we've seen with Uniswap, it's like anyone can integrate them, or SushiSwap. Like, I built NFTX to use Balancer, and then later we moved over to SushiSwap. We're thinking of going to Uniswap with their V3. And, we can call up their team and get help, but we don't need to. And ultimately, that's just so powerful for the little guy, and for that the solo developer that doesn't have the power or the access to reach out to these teams. And they can just go and they can read the documentation, and they can spin up their own front end. They can add their own fees on top if they want to make a better front end. And that's really the power of Web3, and like this idea of like a money Lego, is that the projects which seem to do the best are very targeted use cases. And it's like, you have Aave for lending, you have Uniswap for trading, you have Wi-Fi for or Yearn for your yield, and that you don't end up seeing these big monopolies that kind of do all these different use cases. Instead, what happens is these use cases get combined. So it's like, you can build a product which leverages the liquidity from Uniswap and then takes those trades and puts it in Aave so that you earn income from people borrowing. And that's where you get that composability. And you don't have that in Web 2, where it's like, I can go and make a product which takes your pictures from Facebook and then puts them onto Twitter, because there's just all these guardrails, and it's not as composable, and the data's not all open. So yeah, I'm definitely a little biased and towards the spectrum of very decentralized, but yeah, that's the route we're taking with NFTX, and I think there's a lot of upside for teams that choose to go that way.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I just wonder, do you have any questions for us as a community that are just now getting started and excited about NFTs, in terms of where you've seen our interest so far? Are we barking up the wrong tree? Are we excited about the right things?
Yeah,
Is
no,
there something that's on your radar that you should be excited about that we've not brought up yet, that you think we should be shared with us now? Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
yeah, I mean, I guess I would be curious, like, if you guys feel, because like, no doubt GameStop, it was this very unique situation where um, the asset ended up getting traded as a meme, basically. And I think there's a lot of similarities there to like meme coins and also NFTs. So I guess my question would be like, do you guys have you felt left out with the whole profile picture thing? And do you see like the GameStop community enjoying being able to identify with their own profile pictures or avatars? And yeah.
I mean, me personally, yes, I've kind of followed down that rabbit hole, and I've got a bunch of profile picture NFTs myself. And just by what we've seen on some of the GameStop executive socials, I have to believe that they seem to believe that way as well. I think that PFPs, profile pictures that are verifiable, is something that's going to be very new, and is still very new for our users, because it then really does become strictly reputational at this point. Because at the end of the day, I think it'll help fight a lot of misinformation and disinformation, because you're going to be able to know you're operating with an honest broker based on what PFP they're using and what that's tied to in the past, because you can no longer hide behind Web 2 deleting your comment for you.
Yeah, it's a really cool situation, and like, we're still so early. Like, it would be so cool if I could go on Twitter and just say like, show me all the HD punks on Twitter, or show me all the Bored Apes on Twitter, right? And then you end up basically having these sub communities form that are like kind of like digital tribes. And I think, yeah, the GameStop community seems to have all the pieces there socially, to kind of really enjoy that. So yeah, it's awesome to see you guys getting excited about it.
I mean, do you agree, after talking with us, that we were our own individual circles that are kind of on a collision course that's going to make a Venn diagram that's overlapping in the middle now, in terms of what you guys as crypto degenerates are after, and what GameStop shareholders are anticipating and participating in the Ethereum environment with the NFT marketplace?
Yeah, I think there's both like a convergence happening, and then I think there's also like a divergence happening as well within the NFT space. So like I see a lot of different demographics converging on NFTs as a technology, but then ultimately the NFT space becoming full of different niches for like gaming NFTs and art NFTs, profile pictures, music, charities, subscriptions, used games, and that ultimately, you know, no one's going to be able to keep up with all of it. But yeah, that's what's really exciting about this time right now is that you have these different forces at work, and it's kind of just all a melting pot at the moment.
Cool. Well, I guess I'll try to get you out of here with this because you tipped us off a little bit here, and I understand you might be under an NDA and you might not be able to say anything. But you'd mentioned that you've mentioned working with some of the GameStop engineers and that you're excited about what they're potentially whipping up here. Is there anything more that you could share for our audience that'll make them super excited, or do we just continue to wait and hold?
Yeah, no, it was funny when I had the call with them because like they made it very clear that they are withheld by NDAs, whereas we at NFTX aren't. And we don't have a real company, we don't have a real bank account. Like we're 100% on chain, which has its drawbacks. For instance, cannot get my visa limit raised because they think I'm unemployed. But that it also has these benefits that we get to play kind of more by the Wild West rules than the TradFi rules. All I can really say about the call with those guys is that they seem to definitely know what they were talking about. And it was I was really glad to see that, these developers seemed like genuine users and participants of the decentralized movement, because there have been a lot of projects that try to kind of ride this NFT wave, but without really understanding the fundamentals that underpin it all. And these GameStop devs, like they seemed like the type of people I would want on the NFTX team. Very solid.
Well, Gauss, thank you so very, very much for your time. You've been, absolutely awesome to us, and thank you for making more of it to come back and answer more of our questions, and for volunteering your Reddit username. We've gone ahead and approved you to Superstonk, so if you want to come and start commenting with us, you're welcome to. And if the pinging gets to be too much, let me know, and we'll try to help you out with that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's been a while since I've hung out on Reddit, so I'll definitely give that a go. And thanks a lot for having me, guys. It was nice to get a second shot at answering these questions.
Yeah, no, it was great to have you back. Doom or Platt or Luma, I know we're kind of wrapped up here. I don't know if you guys have any follow-up questions before we close it here.
I, for one, just wanted to thank you for your time and really appreciate your perspective on these things. The only other thing I could ask is if there is a secondary roundtable or a secondary follow-up, if we have different guests, would you be interested in coming back and chatting as more information comes to light?
Yeah, to follow up on that, I guess, is Owen had offered to potentially put us in touch with some of the ZK Sync folks on the technical team. I didn't know if maybe Avery or anybody in the technical team from NFTX that's really involved with the nuts and bolts of layer 2 would want to participate in some discussion like that if we were to have one.
I don't think we would be on the level of those guys to be able to participate. It's like, they kind of they build it and we use it. But I'm definitely personally happy to join in future roundtables if you think that I'll be a good addition.
Well, this has been Luma on behalf of myself, Dismal Jellyfish, and the rest of the mod team. Thank you for tuning into r/Superstonks production, the first NFT roundtable here on GME Radio. See you on the moon.